The day my son-in-law walked into the conference room without acknowledging me, I knew exactly what kind of meeting this was going to be. He didn't look up from his phone, didn't say good morning, didn't even glance in my direction when he pulled out the chair at the head of the table. My father-in-law's chair, the chair that had belonged to the man who built this company from nothing and sat down like he'd been born in it. I'd been with Holloway BioSystems for 29 years. I joined when the company was still operating out of a converted warehouse in Raleigh, back when we were 12 people trying to develop a non-invasive glucose monitoring system that everyone in the industry said couldn't be done. My father-in-law, Edmund, was the kind of man who didn't hear the word can't the same way the rest of us did. He heard it as a starting point. I was 31 when I came on board as his lead research engineer. By the time I was 40, we had our first FDA clearance. By the time I was 50, the core technology I developed, a photonic sensor array that could read blood chemistry through the skin without a single needle, was in hospitals across 14 states. Edmund used to say I was the engine of the company. He meant it as a compliment. I knew that. But looking back, I think I was also the invisible one. The one who stayed late while the executives took the credit. The one whose name appeared in internal memos, but rarely in press releases. That was fine with me for a long time. I was building something real. That was enough. Then Edmund had his first stroke. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon in November. He was in the middle of a board presentation when his left hand stopped working. By Friday, his son-in-law, my wife's younger brother, a man named Corbin, who had spent the last 4 years running the company's marketing division with all the depth of a man who had read one business book on a flight to Miami, had convened an emergency leadership meeting. I wasn't invited. I found out about it from the receptionist. Corbin took over as acting CEO within the week. Edmund was still in the hospital. My wife called him every day. I watched her face get tighter each time she hung up. She didn't tell me what they talked about. I didn't push. In the early days, Corbin at least pretended to value input. He would come to my office, sit across from me with that practiced look of concern he developed, and ask me questions about the pipeline. I'd answer honestly. I'd explain where we were in the development cycle for our second-generation sensor. I'd walk him through the regulatory timeline. He'd nod, take no notes, and leave. Then the consultants arrived. A firm out of Boston. 4 of them, all under 40, all in clothes that looked expensive in a way that made you feel vaguely embarrassed about your own appearance. They were brought in to conduct what Corbin called a structural efficiency review. What that meant, in practice, was that they spent 3 weeks walking around the building asking questions that revealed they didn't understand the difference between a prototype and a production model. And then they presented a 40-slide deck recommending we outsource our core research function to a lab in Singapore. I submitted a 22-page rebuttal. I had 3 of our senior scientists co-sign it. Corbin thanked me for my input and implemented the recommendations anyway. Over the next 8 months, 11 of our most experienced researchers either left or were let go. The Singapore lab produced work that was technically competent and entirely missed the point of what we were trying to do. Our FDA renewal timeline slipped by 14 months. 2 hospital networks quietly put our contract renewals on hold pending the outcome. I kept showing up. I kept doing the work. I told myself Edmund would recover, would come back, would look at what was happening, and put a stop to it. Edmund didn't recover. Not fully. By the following spring, he could walk with a cane and speak clearly enough to have short conversations. But his stamina was gone. He tired easily. The board, led now by 2 members, Corbin had quietly brought on during the restructure, voted to make Corbin's position permanent. I heard about it from the same receptionist. The morning of the conference room meeting, the one where Corbin didn't look up from his phone, I had been at the company for 29 years, 4 months, and 16 days. I know that with precision because I counted it afterward, sitting in my car in the parking garage, trying to understand what had just happened. Corbin had brought 2 people with him. One was the head of HR, a woman who had joined the company 8 months ago and had never once been in my lab. The other was someone from the legal team I didn't recognize. They sat on either side of him like punctuation. He told me the company was evolving. He used that word 3 times, evolving. He said the research function was being restructured around AI-assisted development platforms, and that my role, as currently defined, was being eliminated. He said it with the calm of someone who had rehearsed it, and possibly with the relief of someone who had been waiting to say it for a long time. I asked if I was being terminated. He said my position was being eliminated, which was a different thing. I asked what the difference was. The HR woman slid a folder across the table. Severance terms, 30 days, a non-disparagement clause, a release of all claims. I looked at the folder. I looked at Corbin. He was already looking back at his phone. I picked up the folder, stood up, said thank you, and walked out. I did not sign anything that day. I drove home. My wife was at work. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time without turning on any lights. The house was quiet in that particular way. It gets in the middle of the day when you're not supposed to be there. I could hear the refrigerator humming. I thought about calling Edmund. I'd visited him twice since his stroke. He looked smaller than I remembered. His eyes were still sharp, but his body had gone quiet around them, like the rest of him was slowly stepping back. I didn't call him. Not yet. What I did instead was go to my home office. It's a small room at the back of the house, more of a study than a real office. Bookshelves on 2 walls, a desk that I've had since graduate school, a filing cabinet that I've never once organized properly. There is one item in that filing cabinet that I have never misplaced, never moved, and never spoken about at work. In the bottom drawer, behind a hanging folder labeled Insurance Documents Auto, is a manila envelope. Inside that envelope is a 31-page document. It is the original invention disclosure for what eventually became the Holloway BioSystems photonic sensor array. I drafted it in the spring of my 2nd year with the company, working nights and weekends in the warehouse lab. At the time, Edmund and I had an agreement. Verbal, which I know sounds naive in retrospect, but Edmund was that kind of man, and I was that kind of young, that I would receive named inventor status on any patent filing derived from my work, and that a specific clause would be included in any assignment agreement. If I was ever terminated without cause, ownership of the core technology would revert to me. Edmund had his attorney draft the actual language. I had my own attorney review it. We both signed. I had not looked at that document in 11 years. I pulled it out of the envelope and read through it slowly. Sitting at my desk with the afternoon light coming in sideways through the window, my handwriting on the margins looked like someone else's. The date at the top was 27 years ago. There it was, paragraph 14, subparagraph C. In the event of involuntary termination without documented cause, all rights, title, and interest in the inventions described herein shall revert to the named inventor. I sat with that for a while. Then I called my college roommate, who had become a patent attorney in Charlotte. His name is Howard. I've known him for 35 years. I called his cell, not his office line. He answered on the 2nd ring. I told him what had happened. I told him about the meeting, about the folder they slid across the table, about the 30 days and the non-disparagement clause. Then I told him about the manila envelope. There was a long pause. Then Howard said, "Please tell me you didn't sign anything." I told him I hadn't. Another pause. Then, "Send me the document tonight. Don't touch the severance paperwork. Don't respond to any emails from their legal team. And don't tell anyone what you just told me." I did exactly what he said. That night, I scanned every page of the invention disclosure and the signed assignment agreement and sent them to Howard's personal email address. Then I put the originals back in the envelope, drove to my bank the next morning when it opened, and put the envelope in a safe deposit box. Howard called me back 48 hours later. He said the clause was enforceable. He said it was unusually well drafted for its era, and that whoever Edmund had used was thorough. He said the key question was whether Holloway BioSystems had documented cause for my termination, and from what I described, no performance issues, no misconduct, No written warnings, nothing but a folder slid across a conference room table. The answer was almost certainly no. He said one more thing. He said the technology covered by that patent had been licensed, sub-licensed, and built upon in ways that the original filing never anticipated. The current estimated value of the core IP, based on recent comparable licensing deals in the medical device sector, was somewhere between $800 million and just over $1 billion. I wrote that number down on a notepad. Then I sat there and looked at it. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't even relief exactly. It was something quieter and stranger than either of those things. It was the feeling of a door that had been closed for a very long time, slowly swinging open, and not knowing what was on the other side. I didn't do anything dramatic. I didn't call Corbin. I didn't call anyone at the company. I went to bed at my normal time. What happened over the next 6 weeks was methodical. Howard engaged a litigation firm in Raleigh with experience in IP reversion cases. We filed a formal notice of claim with the Patent Office. We sent a certified letter to Holloway BioSystems' legal department informing them that I had not signed the severance agreement, that I was asserting my rights under the original assignment clause, and that any attempt to proceed with licensing or product sales using the covered technology would be considered infringement. Their response came 11 days later and was, in Howard's words, aggressive in a way that suggested they were scared. They claimed the reversion clause was void because the original assignment had been superseded by a subsequent employment agreement I'd signed in my 15th year with the company. Their argument was that the new agreement contained a standard IP assignment clause that transferred all work product to the company, which they said retroactively covered the original invention. Howard read their response and called me. "They have a problem," he said. Their problem was that the subsequent employment agreement did include a standard IP assignment clause, but it also included, in an appendix that their own legal team had apparently not read carefully, a carve-out that explicitly stated the clause did not apply to inventions covered by prior individual agreements still in effect. Edmund's attorney had put it there, 15 years ago, quietly and specifically. I asked Howard if he thought Edmund had planned for this. Howard was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I think Edmund was the kind of man who prepared for things he hoped would never happen." I thought about that for a long time. The litigation moved faster than I expected, partly because Howard's firm had a strong record in this area, and partly because Holloway BioSystems made a strategic error early on. They continued operating under the covered technology while the dispute was pending, which strengthened our infringement argument considerably. 3 months in, their board requested a mediation session. I sat across from Corbin for the first time since the conference room meeting. He looked tired in a way he hadn't before. His hair was different. He was dressed more formally than usual, which I took as a signal that someone had told him to take this seriously. He didn't look at his phone once. The mediator was a retired federal judge named Margaret, who had the demeanor of someone who had seen every version of the situation and was mildly bored by all of them. She ran the session with exact efficiency. There was no yelling. There was very little emotion of any kind, at least on the surface. At one point, Corbin said directly to me and not through the attorneys that he hadn't understood the full implications of what he was doing when he authorized my termination. I didn't respond. I let Howard respond. What we ultimately negotiated was not a payment to me, though there was a licensing structure involved that I will not describe in detail for legal reasons. The more significant outcome was structural. The board agreed to reconstitute with 2 independent directors. The Singapore lab arrangement was terminated. The company's core research function was rebuilt domestically, with a research director reporting directly to the board rather than to the CEO. Corbin remained CEO. That was a condition of settlement that I did not have the standing to override, and I'll be honest, I'm still not entirely at peace with it. But the company that emerged from those negotiations was something closer to what Edmund had built. The people who came back to lead the research team were serious people. They knew what they were doing. Edmund died 14 months after my termination, on a Sunday morning in February. His daughter called me. My wife and I drove to the hospital and sat with the family. I held his hand for a while. He was unconscious by then, but I talked to him anyway. I thanked him for paragraph 14, subparagraph C. I don't know if that sounds strange. It felt like the right thing to say. At his memorial service, 3 of the researchers he had hired in the early years stood up and spoke about what it had meant to work for someone who kept his word. One of them had been there even longer than me. She said Edmund believed that the people who built things deserved to own them, and that he had tried to structure the company that way from the beginning. I thought about the manila envelope, about a man who had prepared for things he hoped would never happen. After the service, his daughter found me in the parking lot. She said her father had told her in his last coherent weeks that he was glad I hadn't signed the severance agreement, that he had been worried I would. I told her I almost did, that I had come very close that first night. She nodded. She said her father always believed the right people found their way to the right decisions, given enough time. I drove home. My wife was in the kitchen making coffee. I sat down at the table where I'd sat in the dark on the day I was let go, and I watched the afternoon light come in through the window, and I thought about how 29 years is a long time to build something, and how the most important thing I ever did in those 29 years was ask one careful man to put one careful sentence in writing. My name is still on that patent. It will be there long after the conference room meetings and the consultants and the 40 slide decks are forgotten. That's the part they didn't think about when they slid that folder across the table. I've thought a lot about what actually saved me. Not in a dramatic sense. No lightning bolt, no moment of sudden clarity. Just a quiet accumulation of choices made over decades that I didn't fully understand the weight of until I was sitting alone in a dark kitchen with nothing left but a manila envelope and a filing cabinet. The first thing that saved me was integrity, not the word people put on LinkedIn profiles. The real kind, the kind Edmund had, the kind that made him put paragraph 14, subparagraph C in writing even when no one was forcing him to. I watched that man run a company for almost 30 years, and the through line of everything he did was this. He kept his word, even when keeping it cost him something. I tried to live that way too. I showed up. I did the work. I documented things properly. I didn't cut corners on the invention disclosure because I was tired or because no one was watching. That habit of doing things right when no one required it, that's what paragraph 14 was built on. You can't manufacture that kind of foundation in a crisis. You either laid it down years ago or you didn't. The second thing was clarity of mind when it mattered most. When Corbin slid that folder across the table, my instinct was to reach for the pen. I was 60 years old, freshly humiliated, and a part of me just wanted it to be over. What stopped me wasn't courage. It was a specific kind of thinking. The ability to pause inside a moment that was designed to make you act fast and ask, what am I actually agreeing to here? I had that folder in my hands for about 45 seconds before I set it down and stood up. 45 seconds of not signing changed everything that came after. That's the thing about clear thinking. It doesn't have to be elaborate. Sometimes it's just the discipline to slow down when every pressure in the room is pushing you to hurry. The third thing was endurance, not stubbornness. There's a difference. Stubbornness is refusing to change. Endurance is continuing to show up for something you believe in, even when the return isn't obvious, even when the people around you have stopped valuing what you're doing. I spent 29 years building something real at a company that eventually treated me like a line item to be eliminated. I could be bitter about that. Some days I am, a little. But those 29 years are also why I had anything worth fighting for. The work was real. The patent was real. Howard told me the clause was enforceable because the underlying technology was genuinely significant. And it was significant because I had spent decades making it so. You can't shortcut that. You can't fake it. Corbin hired consultants who couldn't tell a prototype from a production model. And that gap between the people who actually build things and the people who manage slides about them is exactly where the story turned. Edmund spent his career believing the people who built things deserved to own them. He didn't just say it. He structured it that way. He put it in writing and then put a carve-out in an appendix 15 years later so it would hold. That's not luck. That's a man with a clear conscience and a long view. I keep that folder in a safe deposit box now. I don't take it out often, but I know it's there.